Hello and welcome to today's episode of our podcast, where we'll be diving into the world of innovative livestock management solutions with Ewen Wardman, the CEO and co-founder of iLivestock. In a nutshell, iLivestock is on a mission to make data capture accessible for livestock farmers all over the world by creating tailored software and hardware solutions. They're simplifying and streamlining the process for cattle and sheep farmers to capture essential data on their farms. Hi, Ewan. Thanks very much for joining us.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you very much for having us here.
Not at all. So, always a good place to kick off. Would you mind telling us kind of the story behind iLivestock and what inspired its creation?
Yeah, it is a bit of a strange one, some people would say. Hello everyone. I'm Ewan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of iLivestock. So the creation of iLivestock, it is odd. So I started a job actually in a company called Allflex, which is known as a tag company now owned by MSD. But at the time, I had a white van and I traveled around all the livestock markets and abattoirs and large-scale farms in the UK. And that was in 2010, just as the legislation was coming in for compulsory EID in sheep. And oddly enough, though, after doing that for a couple of years, it was whilst I was on a pig farm in China, installing what you would describe as a very large-scale RFID system onto the farm for traceability of pigs. What was fascinating is before we were installing that, the way they dealt with it is they had EID tags, but they used their smartphones and just took pictures of the tags and then wrote notes next to the picture. And then literally printed that off on a piece of paper and stuck it in the office. So you'd have a picture of a tag and then the notes next to it. And that's how they did their animal management. And it was at that point I thought, well, why don't we just have an app that you just have a digitized notebook, so you go beep and you read a tag that comes into your phone and then you add the note there. Like, it was a really simple concept.
So, roughly when are we talking? We're back in 2018 or?
No, this is 2012.
Wow. So even then, and I'm assuming in China, as an operation on that scale, I mean, we're talking thousands or tens of thousands of livestock.
Yeah, so hundreds of thousands. So the size of the pig system I was on, it roughed about 60,000, but then was scaling up. It was just if you just imagine an open expanse in the middle of nowhere, that was just massive. We were installing this system to start with. So yeah, 2012. So that was back when an iPhone 4.
Yeah.
just a few years after the original iPhone. And actually, that's why iLivestock is called iLivestock. It was all the fashion back then to put an I in front of your name.
Yeah.
And that's where it came from. So it was so basically, the concept was simple. My day job, because this was very much a thing that we were doing in the background in a shed, the day job was integration of RFID equipment on farm. And I was involved in a project for creating an EID reader that was going to be sold in the UK, now known as the RS420, that quite a lot of people have. But it was the first reader of its type that could actually talk to a smartphone, specifically an Apple phone. Because Apple have an ecosystem where it requires you, well, back then it did, to have something called an MFI chip made for iPhone. So in the back, you used to get a little logo on devices. If anyone remembers it, it used to say made for iPhone. That's still there, but it's sort of gone now with new Bluetooth technology. But that's where it came from. So I thought, right, we need to make an app that captures an EID number. And it just then grew arms and legs from that point in terms of, well, if you're reading an EID tag of a sheep, what does a farmer want to do with it?
Yeah.
And that's where we started off going down the line of our compliance sort of journey. And that's really, well, to be honest, that's how it was created. So I came back and I knew a friend called Jamie and another guy called Jim. Very different people. Jamie was in the healthcare sector. and Jim was working for GE and experienced software developer. So we thought, well, let's make this. And that's how it started in 2012. So a very long time ago now, unbelievably.
So that's a really interesting origin story, which I'm always so fascinated to hear them when we speak to innovators and entrepreneurs. But so we'll jump forwards then, because that's an interesting start point. You know, where is iLivestock now, and kind of what are the sort of the key features and benefits?
Okay. So where we're at now is that we have 3 co-founders, the originals, myself, Jamie, and Jim, that I mentioned. We have 2 investors in the business, and then we have a team made up of a whole range of people, but it's got 10 staff in it now. And as you mentioned in your intro, we're here to make data capture accessible for livestock farmers around the world. So some of the things we've been working on is compliance to start with. That was our driving point. So red tape, nightmare, problems. So some of the things we talk about are using iLivestock will save you 8 hours a month in just paperwork alone. So we're talking about integration with national databases for farming, using the barcode scanner on your phone to scan a medicine bottle into your medicine cabinet, so you don't have to write it down. Recording lambing information, recording deaths, recording your movements on or off. And that's applicable to sheep, and it's also applicable to cattle. We started in sheep and we moved to cattle. Some would say that was the wrong way around of doing it. But it's given us a good bedrock, because when we have people using cattle, there's a lot less of them than there are sheep being managed in the system.
If you can do sheep, you can do cattle.
Yeah, exactly. So it started off as compliance. So that was its main driving factor for people that are just trying to get on top of things rather than scribbling it in notebooks. And we, like I say, back in 2012, when we were just looking at get an EID number into a system, it became very clear very quickly that we needed to spend a lot of time on farm, going through the pain of what everyone else was going through in terms of the flock book and herd book and legislation that they were having to make sure from a farm insurance point of view that we could just cover that digitally. So that's its main driving point for a lot of people, and it still is today, actually. We have a spectrum of people using it. Some people just want to use it for their medicine record keeping, because that's the biggest nightmare they have. And then some people are using it from everything from compliance to performance recording to weighing and so on.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers that question relatively well.
No, it absolutely does, and I think there's a couple of interesting points there. One is obviously that the amount of paperwork and red tape in modern farming globally, but obviously within the UK, and something which is such a big issue, and I think the role of technology to be able to try and minimize that or smooth that path is just so vital. And I think a lot of successful startups, for example, have kind of worked to solving those problems that are kind of vital. But once you've got that sorted, it frees up a huge amount of time to focus on arguably more quote unquote more interesting things. So I think that's a fascinating area to start focusing on.
Yeah, it just is. It just sucks so much time out of your life dealing with it, and also it's so easy to do something and then forget you've done it. So if you've got your phone on you, and you get into a habit of just doing it there and then, it means it's done, rather than trying to remember it a week later. When you write into something. And there's another interesting point to it is, we capture all this information digitally to help farmers save time, and they do save time. But we can only go so far, because we run into issues that we would like to have digital movement licenses for moving animals, but we just can't do that. So we sometimes have scenarios where digitally the information for a movement is captured, and we can send that to a national database for the farmer, which saves time.
Yeah.
But they then still have to print out the movement document to go with the animal, to then send it, or to go with the animal, and then send a paper record of it by the post. It's crazy.
So yeah, excuse my ignorance. I had no idea that was still the case. What do you think's the bottleneck on that? Do you think it's antiquated systems on the kind of regulatory side? What do you see where do you see the potential to kind of move that forward? Because it sounds like from what you're saying, you and probably others have already got digital solutions for that. It's that the other side needs to catch up.
Yeah, I would say there's probably two parts to it. There's the systems that we're integrating with, generally speaking, with the exception of some of the Scott EID systems, are quite old and needing to be replaced. And I know they're working on it, but it's, it takes time. But also, I think there's a general feeling that to force a farmer to go digital is a very tricky decision, because everything costs a lot of money, or they don't know what they're doing, or they don't know how they're going to use it. So they have to keep that channel open for being able to write out a piece of paper and send it to someone in the post, which then just puts you into that murky gray area of, well, we want to do it, but we can't quite do it. And then that means you end up with a scenario like that, where you get someone who wants to use digital data and improve their process, but it can only go so far. So it's a bit of both. I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure this particular niche in this particular sector is probably not the only one that's complaining about these sort of problems. The other point that you made, which I thought would be worth just circling back to a little bit, is around you spending a significant amount of time on farm trying to understand the realities of the problem. And I think this is a recurring theme that we found both on this podcast and generally as an organisation, which is the more successful potentially projects and startups will often be those that have done exactly that have gone out and got into field or onto farm and really understood like what the actual problems are, where the bottlenecks are, etc. Could you talk maybe just a little bit more about how you approach that, and if any tips and recommendations based on the experience you have?
Yeah, especially in our space, as we're a software company that dabble in hardware. This space is quite contested these days, and you get a lot of money flowing into companies that have an idea, but they don't spend that much time on a farm. They just follow the concept of something, which isn't necessarily wrong, but it means they've got quite a path to, once they launch their version 1 product, they've then got a lot of backtracking to do. You see it quite a bit. For us, we're quite fortunate that, because a lot of my time during the day was linking up with farmers, it meant that in the time off, I could spend a lot of time then on those farms. So we, during 2012 to 2019, so quite a long time, we would spend extensive periods of time on farm. We're talking like a week, just almost living there. Because you can turn up on a farm for a couple of hours and they can have a chat with a farmer, which is incredibly useful. But to actually get involved like it's an apprenticeship is a much better idea in terms of realizing where the struggles were. So we were quite fortunate in that we could do that. So in the early days, we spent a lot of time on farm, mainly because I quite enjoyed it as well, if I'm honest. It was a good excuse. I'm not from a farming background at all.
Yeah.
I came from a B2B telecom company. So I fell into farming, actually, into that job with Allflex, traveling around in a white van on farms and abattoirs and things. And it kind of just became a bit of a passion. So my advice for anyone that's trying to get into this sort of space or make something for farming is, don't just think that spending a few hours or having test farms actually going to help you that much. You need to embed someone or yourself, if you're leading the project, on a farm. Become a farmer for a period of time at one of their busiest, most stressful times. Generally, lambing, or 24 hours before an inspection when total chaos is happening. And I think it sets you up pretty good in terms of how the product should work, because in software, people always want to design stuff which is the newest tech, the fanciest tech, the UI that should flow in a certain way. But actually, UI principles that you might get with someone that's to come out of uni or has out of fintech, it's useful to balance it, but it's completely irrelevant to how a farmer actually works. So understanding that and getting your team to understand that, it was one of the challenges for us, for sure.
Yeah, and it's good to hear that. I think, one of the sort of primary things that we do Agri-EPI is trying to bridge that gap between the kind of innovator, entrepreneurial community and the actual farming community. And that's one of the reasons why we have extensive kind of innovation farm network. And it sounds like we were saying is either, so building on that, you either need to, as you said, stay on farm, or, have a co-founder that is a farmer or, has worked deeply in.
Yeah, has a link to farming in some ways, so you can get on a farm. Some of our fellow competitors, are started by farmers because they see the obvious problem in front of them. But I think it's especially in this industry, if you don't do that and you just coop up a good idea, and you think it's going to work, and then you launch it, it's quite a come down when you realize it's not quite right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So obviously we talked about the necessary and the boring compliance stuff. Would it be interesting to have a little discussion about, the next stage, which I guess is the importance of monitoring animal metrics, whether that's health, weight, etc., which we're seeing, an emergence of technologies such as self-tones now. So it'd be interesting to hear kind of why you think that's crucial. And how you've developed the product to kind of deal with those things.
Yeah, so it became quite evident early on in our sort of time on farm development process that weight is a key factor of every, especially if you're beef and sheep. Weight is just a key factor. For the people that know, great, but say if you some of your listeners that don't, even if you just take the simple principle of when you buy a piece of meat, you're paying on its condition, but also you're paying on its weight. So farmers are the same. They're getting paid on weight. So if you're not weighing something, then it's quite hard to know when you're sending it off at the right time. So from our side, we look at weight as an iLivestock managed animal. So if you're weighing constantly or at the right times, sheep or cattle, then you're more likely to sell it in spec quicker with no penalties and get it off your farm quicker, which means you'll feed it less, which has so many benefits. And also from a carbon footprint point of view as well, it's not alive as long, simply put. But also from a health point of view as well, if you've got something wrong with an animal, it may look fine on the outside, but its weight may be dropping off, especially on sheep. Its weight may be dropping off, but it's sort of hidden from eye. And if you can intervene quicker, it means that you might be able to get that animal back on track quicker, which means you'll get it off the farm quicker, which means you get it in spec quicker. If you don't notice for so long, say lameness or a parasite infection or something, especially on the sheep side, you might never get it in spec. So you're selling it out of spec. It's been on your farm longer, and you're just wishing you would have weighed it. And some people might say, well, why doesn't everyone just weigh everything? Well, to be clear, everything is weighed at some point. But on the farm, one of our things is that the technology that allows farmers to weigh their animals is quite expensive. And that's one of the reasons.
Is this like, do you mean like crushes and things like that? Or?
Yeah. Well, even if you avoid the crushes and the handling system, because a lot of farmers may have an old one of that, they may have invested in that, but it's the the weigh indicators that have been around for a while, but it's the weigh indicators and the cost that come along with that. So in some scenarios, you may be a sheep farmer, and you're thinking, well, I'm going to weigh them. I'm going to track their weights. I'm going to track it in iLivestock. I want to see their daily live weight gains. And you're paying a subscription to our software. Let's say it's £20 a month. And then someone's saying to you, well, you should weigh. You go, okay, I'm going to go and look at what I should buy. And before you know it, once you've totted everything up, you're going to end up spending, to convert your existing system, let's say, just on the indicator alone, you could be spending $1,500.
Yeah.
And you're like, and then you need a stick reader, and that could be £1,000. So you spent $2,500 and you haven't even done anything yet. So one of our missions at this point then turned into, well, we should really make our own equipment to then fit into our ecosystem, and then from there we can look to how we could reduce that barrier so that more people can weigh.
Yeah.
So yeah, we think weighing is incredibly important, and it's one of our missions to bring that to more accessible to more farmers, and that's where our vision comes from, or our mission, I should say.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating area. And avid listeners of the podcast, if we have any, will remember that a recent episode we discussed an Innovate UK funded project that we've been involved in called OptiBeef, which is led by SRUC. And in that covered some similar topics, but it was looking at the potential, this is cutting edge technologies around things like, using 3D cameras to try and measure weights, but actually a big focus of that project was kind of further up the food chain towards abattoirs. And of course, what I hadn't realized is grading and classification is done manually by highly trained people at abattoirs. And so there was a question there of, well, if we can use technologies like yours to understand weight gain and things like that on farm, well, then how can we make the efficiencies happen further up the food chain so that you can then relate that back? So if you've got much more accurate and unbiased, let's say, grading at an abattoir level, then we can use that data to come back to technology like yourself and say, right, well, how do those two link together? How does the data and the metrics that you pull together then relate to actually what the farmer's being paid on, which is the carcass?
It's very similar to that. We the only difference between us and say something like the OptiBeef project that you're talking about is we're focusing and intend to focus more on farmers that don't do anything because they don't know how to do it. It's too expensive.
Yeah,
they're worried about doing it. So we're trying to bring down a cost barrier to a point where it's just obvious, especially if we're then have an education and support infrastructure designed to overcome the barriers to this adoption as well. So it's all fine and well having a good commercial model that makes sense, but for our customers that we're looking at to try and help in the industry, education alongside that is massively important. So it's say if you take
so you've gone down the accessibility route, and I think it's a vital topic to discuss because so much of agricultural technology can often, I think, one of the things that gets a pushback is that sometimes it can feel inaccessible to your average or your smaller or maybe your less tech savvy farmer. And I think it's a valid objection or a valid pushback on some technologies. And it sounds to me like a big part of your aim here is to make sure that you are making it accessible in the same way that, let's say, a drone ag or other technologies are really focused on accessibility to your average farmer.
Yeah, exactly. We are targeting a market that feels, well, in some ways, just left out. A lot of tech is developed for large scale operations or larger scale operations that could technically afford it. So we're going after the farmers, which I spent a lot of time with, that are doing the day-to-day farming business, family farm, maybe small, maybe they've only got 20 cows, maybe they've got 100 cows, but it's something like, I have to correct me on the statistic, but something like 50% or 60% of farming stock is in the smaller side in the UK.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
and the solutions that generally exist on the market are just too expensive for them. So they like the idea of it. Some might take the plunge, But the majority will just carry on doing it the way they've always done it. Even though they're worried about the future, they're not being offered something that actually enables them to do it. So that is our plan, and that's why we're a software company, but also a hardware company. Because in this industry, if we're just a software company, which is a very competitive space, especially in farm management at the moment, generally software companies are, and we do too, you're integrating with pieces of hardware on the farm.
Yeah.
You need to. But if you don't control the hardware cost, you're somewhat limited to what you can integrate with and how much change you can really make. So by us making our own hardware and having our own IP in something gives us the complete flexibility to actually target these markets moving forward.
That's fascinating. So I completely agree with you on the software, the lower barriers to entry, I guess, with software. So I'd love to hear a bit more about the kind of hardware solutions that you've developed. And also how you're aiming to make those accessible to. I mean, I was going to say, as a son, I always use my aunt as a litmus test on these things. She's got a tiny little part-time, almost small holding, an Exmoor sheep and a few cattle. And I often think when I'm looking at these things, is this something which in any way would be accessible to someone like that? Which this does, at least from a cost point of view. But yeah, it'd be great to hear about the hardware.
Yeah, so in the offices, we actually make the hardware ourselves. So it's not outsourced. So in our offices are based just outside Edinburgh in Rosyth, and the e-way that we manufacture, the boards that go in that, the PC boards, are actually made in Dunfermline, so just 10 miles.
Amazing.
And we completely assemble from nothing, including all the soldering, to make these units in the office. Now, there's one of the reasons for doing that is so you can actually understand what you haven't done quite right, but so you can improve it the second time. But also it means from putting these units out on farm, if there's any issues, we know how to fix them and we're not stuck in a middle. So in the UK, there's 500 odd or so of these e-ways operational, weighing animals daily. The difference between our weighing side on our hardware that we have launched is it doesn't have a screen on it. So generally indicators all have screens. They're an indicator that, ours is more of a weigh head. So our simple idea is, I say simple, it probably oversimplifies the complexity of the product, but the simple idea for the farmer, you buy a box which doesn't have a screen on it, and all your functionality is driven from your phone. So
yeah, smart.
If you just want to weigh an animal, literally just see a weight, you don't even want to record it, you just want to see it, that's fine. You just connect up your phone and off you go. If you want to see daily live weight gains and graphs, it's still the same box, you just use your phone. If you want to do daily live weight gains, the weights, weaning weights, medications, notes, flags, it's all done on your phone. You don't have to buy another piece of hardware. The model that exists at the moment for other weigh indicators is you move through a range, a bit like you would move through a spec of a car. Is you have a basic one that just shows you a weight, and then you have another one that's got a keyboard on it, another one that's got a keyboard and a bigger screen. And the business model is simple. They start you on the mid-range one, maybe the simple one, and you go, oh Christ, I wish I bought the better one. And then you sell that and you buy another one. That's the business model.
Yeah.
Our plan is it's just a box. You forget about the box. Once you've got the box, forget about the box, and everything is driven from the software. Now, from a farmer's point of view, one of the, apart from a cost, which is clearly one of the most important parts, but another thing that is underestimated is they're using their phone all the time in some way or another. So when you come to weighing and you come to use the phone, you know what you're doing, right? With pieces of equipment that are custom designed for weighing, you might only use it once a week, or you might in the winter, you haven't used it in a month or 2 months, and you get back to it and you're like, I know how this should work, but I have no idea what button to press.
Yeah.
Right. And then that in itself then goes, oh, sod it. I don't have time. I don't have time to make that damn thing work. I'm not going to ring someone because they probably won't pick up. So I'm just going to write it down. It's things like that make a big difference to us. So by us making our own e-way, it gives us such flexibility in what we can do from a weighing point of view, especially moving forward in our plans. It's already cheaper than I'm going to call them our competitors from a weighing point of view, but we still integrate with our competitors. But it's already cheaper as our solution, and we have quite a lot of plans for it and other products. So it was key for us. It was very important to be able to do it.
I mean, I don't want to get too far off topic, but I think it's quite an interesting one given the context of the podcast. So obviously, the scaling up from prototype through to, let's call it mass manufacture, but you understand what I mean. It tends to be it can often be an issue with all hardware, but within this sector. And I guess a lot of the thinking often is, oh well, let's outsource this to either another manufacturer or even overseas. And I think you've given a really interesting insight there as to why actually keeping it all in-house in the long term, from a kind of being able to sort of vertically integrating, basically, actually works out better for you. I'd just love to hear a little bit, maybe, with your thoughts on that, because obviously the opposite is to kind of push it out of house and potentially get the unit price cheaper, and you've not gone down that route. And I think it's really interesting how that's potentially worked out in your benefit.
Yeah, well, on that benefit, it definitely did. With all the semiconductor issues that are going on.
Yeah.
And if you're in a big production line, with the quantities of a company of our size, or even a big company in the farming sector, the quantities of stuff that you order, you're just not very high up the list. And at least in our scenario, we could completely control the situation on the semiconductor side. So we just didn't experience the issue. We just don't have the issue. One, because the semiconductor we use on our board is quite generic, but also because we were able to buy in all the semiconductors, and not very expensive, quite a while ago. And they're just sitting on a shelf, and then we just use them when we need to use them to etch the board or to make the board. So that's a massive thing. But yeah, with my time, I went to Shenzhen in China, and I had a look around a production line to explore the option. And they could make 1,000 units, 1,000 e-way units manufactured in an hour. And that gives you an idea. For 1,000 units for us, even before our commercialization plans, that could be a year or 2 years worth of units. It's just not required. So we didn't, with the prototyping, we were using, with the prototyping, there's a funny thing. So we actually learned how to make it from Jim, one of our co-founders, was experienced in hardware, but all the soldering and all the equipment we needed, we had to buy it all and go on a course and learn how to do it. And it kind of just stuck with us as this is probably a good idea. And I would highly recommend to anyone that is going to be making a piece of hardware, if they think that outsourcing it to an additional company may save them time at the start, I would think about that process a little bit more.
Yeah.
If you invest your time in learning how to do it yourself, because if you can, it's the point in which you're moving from proof of concept to commercialization of the product that it really helps. Because anyone can mock you up something, it might work, it might not work, but you can get something mocked up or a proof of concept pretty quickly from a subcontractor or a company, and then they'll be like, oh well, we'll make you a jig, and then we'll get it all ready, and we'll put it through all its testing and everything, and then you'll have a product at the end of it, and we'll charge you X. But then it's a bit like you end up with something on your desk, and you've got no idea how the hell the damn thing works, not a clue. So if it doesn't work in the way you imagine it's going to work, that's when you get yourself into a bit of bother.
Yeah, that's really, really fascinating, and I think we don't hear enough of these stories. I think about and always getting into the detail of that, and it's really, really interesting insight and very helpful, I think. So to come back to farm, it'd be I think it's really, really interesting. It'd be really lovely to hear any kind of success stories that you've got with farmers, if you wanted to shout out about.
So I think probably one of our most recent is a guy that made it into a Farmers Weekly just last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago. So he's a gentleman called Hayden Woolley. Apologies, Hayden, if you didn't want me to say it, but I have. So he actually started with 60 sheep with iLivestock, and he's now got over 4,000 breeding
Wow.
ewes, all managed through iLivestock and eWay, and it was the data insights in iLivestock that's allowed him to get to this point. But he's actually running one of the biggest trials in the world for easy care ewes on the sheep side. That's how he made it into the press. So he plans to have over 3,000 animals in performance recording in relation to easy care rams from New Zealand. There's more to that story.
Sorry, for just quickly,
Yep.
And I'm one of them. Could you just explain what the easy care ewes are?
So yeah, it's wool shedding genetics. So
Right.
Wool shedding genetics. It's a big thing. I'm not an expert in it by any means, but Hayden and a gentleman called Ian McDougall, is a vet, have come together to work on these rams from New Zealand. But all this, I think it's a gentleman called Derek Daniels, who's one of the biggest ram breeders in the world. They've combined together to run this trial for easy care wool shedding genetics, and they're capturing all of that information in iLivestock. And then from that, they hope to. Well, I think there's a lot they plan to do from it, to be honest. But it is one of those scenarios where someone's using your product and you think, Christ, they're using it, we're capturing all this information for the size of project that I had no idea that they could possibly do with iLivestock. It's almost, you look at it and go, oh my God, are they doing that? Really? But it's fantastic. So, it's just starting on and off on it. But the point for me with this gentleman, Hayden, and we have a few of these, someone that started with 60 sheep and moved to 4,000 just by using the data captured in our livestock is it's remarkable, and it's fantastic. But it is also remarkable to have that.
It's quite a testimonial. So you've picked a good one there, Ewen. It's interesting. Another project. So one of our innovation farmers, Rob Hodgkins, we're involved in a project with him, which is also doing sheep breeding. This is it's not easy care. It's actually, well, he's called the project low emission sheep, ultra low emission sheep, and so that's doing breeding around methane.
Yep.
Which is another interesting one, and we should maybe have a chat to him about whether or not he wants to use iLivestock for recording on that project.
Well, maybe. I would imagine he's using something in somewhere or another.
Hopefully not pen and paper.
Yeah. No, I would be surprised if he was. Yeah. So Hayden's an interesting story.
It's absolutely fascinating. So, I mean, just to wrap things up, it'd be great to hear, if any kind of big future plans and news. I mean, I understand maybe you're doing another round of investment at the moment.
Yeah, we are. So, our future plans is we have some more hardware products we want to make that fit into our sort of eWay iLivestock ecosystem. But yeah, we just started out looking for some investment. We have 2 investors in the business already who are from the industry. They've been involved in the business since 2019, but we're looking to try and do some investment this year. And the whole plan with that is commercialization of our product. Now we have like say 500-600 farmers using the app daily in the UK, paying for it as well. And we have distribution in South Africa. We've got some other stuff going on in some other countries, but really for us, as I said earlier on in the podcast, for us, we want to target the percentage which we've coined it 70% of farmers that just don't do anything. Now, I don't mean that in a bad way, is that they don't do anything. They are doing stuff on the farm, but I want them to do it digitally, and I want to be able to help them move forward in the future. And it's the investment there that we're looking to use to commercialize that plan into different countries, because it's not just the UK. if anything, the UK is a very complex market, but the issues that a UK farmer has in regards to trying to make something sustainable from a profitability point of view and sustainable from an environmental point of view is the same issue that farmers around the world have. A sheep is a sheep and a cow is a cow.
Yeah.
And we want our product to be able to be used on as many farms around the world to enhance that profitability and that sustainability for whenever that sustainability piece comes. Because obviously some countries in the world are just focusing on the sustainability of their farming base from a profitability point of view, and haven't quite got to the sustainability bit yet.
Yeah.
They talk about it, but they're not really there yet. But I'd like to be in a position where when it does come down the road, we have them covered. And it's the same in the UK. There's a lot of change going on in farming. But if you're just taking the basics of, if we get someone on our platform that just wants to do medications, just wants to do movements to save on the paperwork, I want them to be in a position on our platform in 3 years' time, 5 years' time, that when they're worried about the changes they have to make to be environmentally friendly or carbon credits or whatever it is, there is a system there that is already going to give them the insights that they need to do to comply. So
yeah,
that's
smart.
That's why our investment round is sort of focusing on. Yeah, if anyone wants to talk to me about that, then they're more than welcome.
Well, thank you for a perfect segue. So yeah, well, because it's an absolutely fascinating conversation. What an incredible product or range of products that you've got offering. I really enjoyed that, and it's very good to hear that you're also wrapping in the sustainability angle as well. As always, people can always get in touch with us to get in touch with you. I presume people can get in touch directly via your website as well. But just are there any particular, obviously we have a range of different listeners, so from farmers through to tech developers, who would you be interested in speaking to for either for partnerships and things like that?
We're quite open at the moment. So anyone, we're a company that self-direct, but we have partners as well. If anyone's listening to this podcast and they're thinking to themselves, geez, I've got farmers, or we have farmers that have the compliance problem, but also we want them to weigh, but the cost of that equipment is too much, and we would like to come up with an idea of how could we get this equipment on farm and then monitor that, then we can talk to them. So if you think about us as a platform that allows farmers to capture data to help themselves, and if it's coming through a partner program, then that partner can access that data in some way or another to benefit them. But the bit that a lot of people miss out is you've got to have it at a cost point that works.
Yeah.
And in my view, software is only part of the solution.
That's an interesting hot take, and I think it's worth a ponder on, because often I think people go straight to technology for obvious reasons, in terms of how it's comparatively easier to scale it up, and hardware is hard as it goes. And we see this a lot, but putting in that effort, and particularly when you vertically integrated like yourselves, I mean that's where the real value is.
Yeah. I see it time and time again. I'll come back to my point. You can put a piece of software on a farm for 20, 30 quid a month or whatever it is for capturing information on cows and sheep. But that will rely on the farmer typing something in some way. If you want to integrate it with a piece of hardware, that's where the barrier comes. And that's what we were looking to solve. So yeah, anyone who had that issue and wants to have a talk to us about how that could possibly work for them, please get in touch with us.
Amazing. Thank you, Ewen. It's been absolutely fascinating, and we look forward to keeping in the loop on how things develop.